have been opening more and more large centers just like that one to house people, and that's only the tip of the iceberg.
And of course it's an area that's been affected many times before by hurricanes, and lessons one would hope have been learnt from the response to Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Rita as well. From what you're seeing on the ground, do you think that the same mistakes will not be made this time round?
Yes, I think the city has learned a lot from the housing of the evacuees. They're allowing pets this time because a lot of people refused to go without their pets, and a lot of people were put in danger in Katrina and Rita because of that. Also, one of the big changes is Houston did not evacuate this time. And that was an intentional decision, I think, made because of so many people who had been put in harm's way, that there were as many people who died during the evacuation of Rita as actually during the event itself.
Emotionally, this must take a huge toll as well, to have gone through this so many times.
Well, it does, and it's scary, and it creates a sense of dread anytime there's heavy rains, and that's hard for people to learn to deal with. But one of the things that might not be expected is it clarifies, as hard as it is and how as large of an inconvenience as it is, as long as you and your family are safe, it's really just that. It's an inconvenience. And so you clarify the value of your goods and contents, but you also get to experience so much unity and love and help from so many other people. Both the times my wife and I have flooded, very oddly, those days have been very happy days. As much as we've been sad to lose all of our stuff, seeing people rally around us has been a unique experience.
Incredible to hear that, isn't it? Houston resident there, Zach McCoy.
And with all the concentration on that, we shouldn't forget as well that Texas is not the only area that's been hit by devastating floods. Monsoon rains have had a massive impact across South Asia, India, Nepal and Bangladesh. According to news reports, more than 1,000 people have died just in past days, forced millions from their homes in what's being described as the worst monsoon-related disaster in recent years. Now, Venezuela's new Constituent Assembly has voted unanimously in favour of trying, that is, putting on trial, opposition leaders for treason. It accuses them of promoting economic sanctions imposed by the United States. The decree described the trials as historic and said that they were designed to deal with those who are acting against the interests of ordinary Venezuelans.
Alberto Zambrano is an independent opposition activist in Caracas. We asked him whether he might be affected by this decree.
I might be, because we don't know what the extent of how this decree is going to make. The articles that it entails, we do not know. It's all based upon secrecy that is being carried on by this terrible dictatorship. They can call upon the opposition leaders to be tried for high treason, but our laws explicitly state that unless our Congress has declared war upon another nation, nobody, no citizen of this country can be tried for such crime.
Well, that's an opposition activist in Caracas. Let's get another opposing voice who until recently was actually a diplomat for the government of President Nicolás Maduro at the United Nations. He's Isaias Medina. His resignation on July the 14th, when he finally said that he couldn't support the government anymore, bearing in mind the violence and the street protests, caught a lot of attention. We spoke to him then, so we called him up again to get his response to this new measure.
They're acting accordingly to their authoritarian mandate. They want to undermine human rights, fundamental freedoms, and systematically persecute and eradicate all opposition and dissent. And this is their mandate. They are really showing and taking off their mask and showing how this new regime has become a totalitarian communist regime.
And in your opinion, what would this actually mean for the opposition leaders and the opposition figures? Does this mean there will be no opposition allowed in Venezuela?
Well, as you have seen, they are holding military trials to civilians, and this is for the civilians and students that were protesting in the street. And even not so far, last week, they issued 14 warrants of arrest to acting mayors by military tribunals without due process, violating their natural jurisdiction. So what does this mean? That either you bend the knee to this unconstitutional superpower, or they will be persecuted by illegal military trials.
And where do you think this means they are going, as in they, the government? I mean, you know how the state works. What is happening now in Venezuela constitutionally? You're a lawyer. Tell us what's going on.
Well, very interesting question, because Article 333 of the Constitution of Venezuela explicitly guarantees that the Constitution cannot be amended or changed unless it follows the right process.
Right, and so you're saying so you're saying that this is unconstitutional, and yet is there any body left which can apply that and put that opinion on the government?
Well, without a doubt, it's unconstitutional and fraudulent and illegal, but there is no separation of powers so far.
So there is no check, there is no balance left in Venezuela that can deal with this.
No check and balance, and they have usurped the powers of the Supreme Court. They have usurped the powers of the National Assembly and even of the Attorney General.
And you, I mean, you were sort of part of the movement until just a few months ago when you resigned your post and you remain outside Venezuela. What do you see as the thinking behind this within President Maduro's inner circle? What are they trying to do? Where will this lead?
Well, Lawrence, I just would like to clarify. I have always believed that I'm working for my country and the benefit of my country, not for any government in particular. But I do agree with you that they want to act as jury and executor of the remainder opposition leaders, and they have oppressed ordinary citizens, starving them to death, and they have been killing people softly by an 85% lack of medicine scarcity. So they have shot students in the street and encouraged armed paramilitary groups as state terrorism to terrorize civilians in their houses.
That's Isaias Medina, living in New York at the moment, still outside Venezuela, not applying for asylum, he says. He wants to go back to Venezuela as soon as he can. Doesn't feel able to at the moment. Former UN diplomat for the government of President Nicolas Maduro, now one of those insiders who's become an outsider.
Almost 17 minutes past the hour. Newsday from the BBC World Service. Lawrence Pollard and Claire McDonald with you. Thank you for joining us. Now, after launching a missile which flew over Japan on Tuesday, North Korea says it was part of an exercise to contain Guam, which is a US-administered territory in the Pacific. Pyongyang says it's being provoked by US-South Korea military exercises, which it says are a rehearsal for an invasion of North Korea. Russia and China, for their part, have also cited the drills as a source of the latest tensions. Well, in its latest session last night, the UN Security Council denounced North Korea's latest missile test, unanimously demanding that Pyongyang halt the show restraint.
China is always committed to the goal of denuclearization of the peninsula, the maintenance of peace and stability on the peninsula, and the settlement of the issue through dialogue and consultations. China stands opposed to any chaos or war on the peninsula.
So, will North Korea be frightened or surprised by this response from the UN Security Council? We've been speaking to Daniel L. Davis. He's a senior fellow at the think tank Defense Priorities, a former high-ranking American military.
They might have breathed a sigh of relief that there wasn't anything any more stern than some angry language coming out. So it certainly was no worse than they thought, but probably about what they expected.
And surely part of the problem is that the threats are getting louder, the rhetoric is getting angrier, but actually, is there any threat that's deliverable? Doesn't North Korea sit there confident that no one is going to unleash anything on it?
Well, I would like to say yes, that's the case, that it's both sides are just using rhetoric. But I have to confess that I'm not certain. With President Trump, he's been so hard to read, and you don't have a consistent view from him. So we're not clear at all, and I don't have confidence at all that he's not going to actually take some sort of action. Like, for example, the mother of all bombs he dropped in Afghanistan, or the 28 or 68 cruise missiles he fired in Syria earlier this year. I'm just not that confident, but I really hope that he's getting good advice from his advisors, because that would be catastrophic. And sometimes the best thing that you can do is to take no military action, but to deter. And definitely North Korea can be deterred. And I disagree with anyone who says that they may use these missiles that they're having in a provocative way to launch an attack on someone, because that would be suicidal. And if there's one thing we can say about the Kim regime, is that though they may be evil and they may be wicked, they are not suicidal. They want to remain in power.
Right. So
because the objective is to prevent war, not to launch a war.
Right. So does that mean that you allow North Korea, within its restrictions, to go further along this road, but with the understanding and the warning that that road will lead nowhere? It will lead to no increased threat, because of course a hawk would turn around to you and say, yeah, but if we hit them now, they'll never have nukes, and therefore we won't have the problem.
Well, and if anyone that said that, I would say, no, you're wrong, because you might set them back, but unless you literally destroy their country, all you're going to do is stir up the hornet's nest and cause them to launch a retaliatory strike and kill potentially hundreds of thousands of people in South Korea. And so that is not the case. And then they're still going to be viable unless you completely take them out. But then you're talking about possibly casualties in the million and an all-out war. So I would disagree with my hawks on that case.
And when people say, as they were at the UN, enough is enough, something must be done, that's just the wrong language in your analysis.
Now, we can use that to our advantage by saying, okay, well, we're not going to launch an attack on you, but if you use any of these weapons, then you can count on a very powerful response. That's what deterrence is all about, is to keep the balance there so that there doesn't have an outbreak of war. Based on the current realities, what can we do to prevent war? And that's containment right now, politically or any other way. That is our best course of action.
Moving the conversation on a bit, at least. Daniel L. Davis, Senior Fellow at the think tank Defence Priorities.
News today from the BBC World Service. Headlines: the tropical storm Harvey that has brought a deluge to the American city of Houston appears to be moving off to the north. Venezuela's newly elected Constituent Assembly has voted unanimously to begin treason trials against opposition leaders. And the UN Security Council has condemned North Korea for firing a missile over Japan, but has not threatened new sanctions. Time for the sports news now. It's all happening at Flushing Meadows. Here's Matthew.
Good morning, Claire. Yeah, really fantastic entertainment. If you had a ticket for Centre Court last night, it really rained, so there was a lot of play cancelled on the outside courts, but obviously they got a roof in the main event. And Roger Federer was given a real contest in his first round match of the US Open. It finished 4-6, 6-2, 6-1, 1-6, 6-4. So the Swiss great is through against the 19-year-old American Francis Tiafoe, but Tiafoe gave him a real scare. Tiafoe is the son of Sierra Leonean immigrants, and he got into tennis because his father got work building a new tennis academy near Washington, D.C., and on the strength of being really good in the construction, he was given work as a maintenance man at the tennis academy when it was up and running. Francis, and his twin brother basically lived on the grounds of the academy, got the run of the place. He fell in love with tennis, and now here he is at Flushing Meadows playing the great Roger Federer. He used to dream, he says, of playing Roger Federer at the US Open.
It's a really similar story to Seve Ballesteros, whose father was a greenkeeper. Absolutely. So real working class kids getting it in that way. What a story.
It really is, yeah. And he's a really confident guy. There's a really interesting article that he's written in a publication called The Players Tribune, which pays off. Maybe mine isn't your normal tennis story. Maybe I'm not your normal tennis player, but I belong. And he showed he belonged today at Flushing Meadows. But Federer is through. Someone who isn't through is Angelique Kerber, defending champion, knocked out in the first round by another teenager, Japan's Naomi Osaka. And the transfer window in football finishes tomorrow night in Europe. Loads of deals still to be done. Here's a couple of that have a way to go, you might think. Arsenal have rejected a bid from Manchester City for Alexis Sanchez. We're told the Gunners want Raheem Sterling to move the other way. And Alex Oxlade-Chamberlain has said no to a move to Chelsea, even though Chelsea and Arsenal had agreed a fee.
Right. Where's he off to now, then?
Well, maybe Liverpool, or maybe he'll stay to the end of his contract and then be a free agent at the end of the season.
Watch that one with interest. So, Matthew, thank you. Now, scientists are calling for a change in global dietary guidelines about what we eat. This is because of new data from monitoring 130,000 people in different countries. And it shows that a high carbohydrate intake is worse than a high fat intake for mortality rates. They've also found that limiting our fat intake to less than 30% as currently recommended by the Global Dietary Guidelines does not lower the risk of dying. Well, Dr. Masheed Dikan is from the Population Health Research Institute of McMaster University in Canada, lead author of this report, and joins us now. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
This kind of turns everything that we've thought thus far on its head a bit. So tell us what you found.
Actually, we found, contrary to popular belief, higher fat consumption is associated with a lower risk of death. Those consumed 30% energy from fat had 23% lower risk of mortality and 18% lower risk of stroke.
They're quite startling figures. So how can this be true when we've been told by various health organisations across the globe for years now to reduce our fat consumption because it's good for our overall health, it's good for our hearts?
I can't hear you.
You can't hear me.
I can't hear you.
Okay, well, I'll try that question again. I mean, we've been told for years to reduce our fat consumption to promote our overall health. So why is the opposite now true?
Actually, the majority of data that exists are from Europe and North America. The new evidence that we are providing is global. We have 18 countries, low, middle, high income. Therefore, we have a broader range of fat consumption. We are not suggesting very high fat consumption, but we are suggesting up to 30% energy from fat. It is good for you because when you lower your fat, you increase your carbohydrate consumption. And carbohydrate increases risk of death, stroke, and many other diseases.
And why is that so? Why does carbohydrate put you in a much higher risk of those diseases?
Actually, this is a very interesting question, but I wasn't objective of this present study to answer. But my colleague, Dr. Mente, looked at the LDL cholesterol, total cholesterol, and we found although carbohydrate reduces total cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, but it increases the small, dense, bad cholesterol. Therefore, maybe one of the reasons is that it increases small, dense LDL.
Okay, so that's not good for us. So what kind of carbohydrates, then, should we be cutting back on?
This is a very important question. We are not suggesting very low carbohydrate diet, but we are suggesting if you're eating rice every day, you refine carbohydrate, lower your refined carbohydrate consumption. But complex carbohydrates are good for you.
And give us an example of complex carbohydrate or a range of them that we should include in our diet still.
For example, if you are eating bread, whole wheat bread is good for you. And legumes, they provide, beans provide good carbohydrate, and they are complex carbohydrate. And we're suggesting having, for example, 2-3 servings of legumes per week is good for you.
And we have many, many listeners listening across the world. Do you look at the global diet map, if you will, and think, well, actually, that, given our research now, that is quite a good diet to follow? Where would you look to?
Advice for one population may be not beneficial for another population. Therefore, you have to modify your diet. As you know, we have 18 countries participating in this study. Therefore, we have a very diverse dietary pattern. Mediterranean diet always showed is a good diet, but everything in moderation. We can't suggest everybody eat Mediterranean diet, but modify your diet in a way that you have moderate amount of carbohydrates.
It's fantastic, fantastic advice. We thank you for it, Dr. Masheed Dikan. Thank you.
You're listening to the BBC World Service, and here's what's happening in the studio this week.
We follow Lorna Goodison as she writes a new poem to mark her first Emancipation Day as Poet Laureate of Jamaica. It's a public holiday that commemorates the end of slavery on the island. It's also Lorna's birthday. Not used to writing to deadlines, will she finish it on time?
In the studio at bbcworldservice.com. Whether you're listening on shortwave, medium wave or FM, Digital Radio Mondial brings you superior sound quality with no hiss and no fuss. Compare the difference at drm.org.
The BBC on DRM for Europe. Better radio altogether.
Hello, welcome. This is Newsday from the BBC World Service. Lawrence Pollard and Claire McDonnell with you.
More heavy downpours predicted to hit Texas. We hear from a volunteer who took his boat to the flooded streets of Houston.
Also following in the footsteps of Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, where's the next generation of female African leaders going to come from?
The challenges of bringing up a child when you yourself are still a teenage mum. The latest in our series. All that coming up after the latest news.
BBC News with Neil Nunes. The tropical storm Harvey that has battered the American city of Houston with record-breaking rain for 4 days appears to be moving off to the north. A nighttime curfew is in place to deter looters as rescue operations continue. More than 20 people have died. Venezuela's new Constituent Assembly has voted unanimously in favor of trying opposition leaders for treason, accusing them of promoting economic sanctions imposed by the United States. The decree said the trials would deal with people acting against the interests of Venezuelans. The United Nations Security Council has condemned North Korea's firing of a missile over Japan, which Pyongyang has confirmed it has carried out. The U.S. drafted statement does not threaten new sanctions on Pyongyang. Guatemala's highest court has overruled President Jimmy Morales, who ordered the expulsion of a United Nations official investigating graft allegations against him. The Constitutional Court suspended the deportation order against Ivan Velázquez, who backed an investigation into contributions to Mr. Morales' 2015 election campaign. Iraq has criticized a deal between Syria and Lebanon, giving safe passage to hundreds of Islamic State militants. The militants have been moved from Syria's border with Lebanon to near its eastern border with Iraq. The British Prime Minister Theresa May is visiting Japan with a 15-member business delegation for talks aimed at easing the Japanese corporate world's worries about Brexit. Discussions will focus on preparing the ground for a free trade agreement after Britain leaves the European Union. Data gathered by the Cassini spacecraft has led scientists to calculate that Saturn's spectacular rings may only be about 100 million years old, much younger than previously thought. The data suggests the rings could be the crushed-up remnants of a moon or a comet. BBC World News.